The sun of Illyria rose like a dim orange fireball, spreading its light over endless plains and quiet villages. The world was peaceful. People lived simple lives, growing food, mining minerals, and building homes from white stone. Children played in dusty streets. Old men told stories about the stars, and nobody thought about war or danger. Illyria was a small colony world far from the busy centers of the galaxy, forgotten by most. Life was calm, almost too calm, until the day the sky changed. It started with a strange sound that came from the north, a deep humming noise that made the air shake. At first, people thought it was just a storm coming. Farmers looked up and saw dark shapes moving high above the clouds. The shapes didn't look like birds or human ships. They were too big, too silent. Within minutes, the humming turned into a roar. Then came the light, blinding flashes that turned the sky into fire. The first explosions hit the mining towns. Towers collapsed, metal melted, and people ran in every direction, not knowing who was attacking them or why. The Illyrians had no army, no weapons that could defend against ships from space. All they could do was hide. Families rushed underground into the old mining tunnels, clutching one another as the ground trembled. The sky rained fire. Everything they had built over generations, homes, schools, markets, turned to dust in a few hours. In the middle of that chaos, a young technician named Loran worked inside a half-broken communication center. He was shaking, his face covered with ash, but he refused to leave. He could hear the screams outside, but he focused on his screen, trying to send a signal. "They have to hear us," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Someone out there has to hear us." The equipment sparked and smoked, but he kept typing. His hands were burned, his body was weak, but he wouldn't stop. The message he sent was short, broken, and desperate. It said, "This is Illyria, under attack. We need help. Please, anyone, please." The signal bounced through space, weak and fading, but it escaped the burning sky. No one knew if anyone would hear it. Lauren sat in the dark, alone as the building shook. He could see the lights of enemy ships cutting through the clouds. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer for his people. Outside, the invaders moved without emotion. Their ships were black and smooth, with no markings, no faces to see. They came from the Vrax Dominion, a cruel empire that believed in conquering weak worlds. To them, Illyria was just another small planet to crush and control. They didn't care about the people living there. They wanted the planet's rich minerals and its location near trade routes. So they destroyed everything that stood in their way. Days passed like nightmares. Smoke covered the sky and the air smelled of ash. Survivors hid wherever they could, in caves, broken buildings, and forests. There was no food, no clean water. The invaders hunted them with drones and fire. Parents tried to keep their children quiet so the machines wouldn't find them. The only hope anyone had was that weak, fading message that had been sent into the stars. Some said it was useless. Nobody cared about Illyria. It was too far, too poor. No powerful nation would risk their ships for a world with nothing to offer. People began to lose faith. They whispered in the dark, "We are forgotten." But not everyone gave up. An old woman named Sina, who once taught in the village school, kept telling the frightened children stories about heroes, people who came when all seemed lost. "Sometimes," she said softly, "heroes come when you least expect them." The children listened even when their stomachs ached from hunger. Her voice gave them a little courage to hold on. In the ruins of a destroyed city, a small group of survivors found a radio. They tried to fix it, hoping to hear something, anything. Static filled the air, just noise. Then one night, a faint light blinked on the receiver. It wasn't much, just a flicker, but it meant the signal was still out there. Someone might have received it. Hope, fragile and small, began to return. Meanwhile, far away across the galaxy on a planet called Earth, the distress signal finally reached a listening station. A young operator was drinking coffee when the alert beeped. He frowned, thinking it was interference. But when he listened carefully, he heard the broken voice. "This is Illyria. Under attack. We need help." The words were weak but real. The operator froze. Then he shouted for his commander. Within hours, the message spread through the Terran defense network. Illyria, a forgotten colony on the edge of human space, and was dying. Many officials thought it was hopeless. The enemy was unknown and the distance was too great. But there were others who refused to ignore it. They were known across the stars as the Deathworlders, Humans who had survived on the harshest planet ever discovered, their own homeworld. Humans had always been different. They came from a world full of storms, predators, and diseases. Every other species in the galaxy considered Earth a death world, too dangerous for normal life. But for humans, that danger made them strong. They learned to fight, to adapt, and to never abandon those who cried for help. When the message from Illyria reached them, the Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They remembered their own history, the wars, the pain, the times when nobody came to help them. They would not let another world suffer in silence. Ships were prepared, fleets assembled, and soldiers volunteered before orders even came. Among them was Captain Arya Holt, a woman who had seen too much death but still believed in mercy. As the fleet prepared to leave, the people of Earth watched the news. Some cried, others cheered. They didn't know Illyria, but they understood what it meant to be helpless and afraid. Across the planet, people sent messages to the fleet. Simple words: bring them home. Don't let them die alone. Back on Illyria, the survivors were losing strength. Days turned into weeks. The invaders tightened their control, building bases and capturing anyone who tried to resist. The once beautiful cities became silent ruins. In the tunnels beneath one of the mining regions, Loran was still alive. His body was weak, but he kept the radio running with the last bit of power. He didn't know if anyone had hurt him, but he refused to stop believing. One night, as he lay on the cold ground, he looked up through a crack in the ceiling and saw the stars. They looked distant and cold, but he whispered to them anyway. "Please, someone, answer us." Then he closed his eyes, thinking it was the end. Far beyond those stars, engines roared. The Deathworlders had begun their journey. The cry for help from a dying world had reached them, and they were coming. Not for conquest, not for wealth, but because it was right. And so, while Illyria burned, a promise traveled across the stars. A promise that no one who cried for heroes would ever be forgotten again. When the broken signal from Illyria reached the edge of human space, it was barely understandable. The message was full of static and noise, but the words that could be heard were enough to chill the heart of anyone listening. "This is Illyria. Under attack. Please help us." The voice was weak, frightened, and fading away. It sounded like the last hope of an entire world. At first, some thought it was just an old distress call, maybe a trick or a ghost signal from a long-dead planet. But when the coordinates were confirmed, the truth hit hard. Illyria was real, and it was still burning. The transmission had come only hours ago. That meant people were still alive, still fighting to survive. In a command room deep within Earth's orbital defense base, officers gathered around glowing screens. Maps of space filled the air, showing the long distance between Earth and Illyria. "That's almost 200 light years away," one of them said quietly. "We can't get there in time." Another officer, younger and braver, replied, "We have to try. They called us." That spirit, that human stubbornness, was something no other species understood. Humans had been called Deathworlders because of where they came from. Earth was wild, dangerous, full of diseases, predators, and storms. Every day, humanity had fought just to survive. While other species evolved on peaceful, gentle worlds, humans had grown strong in struggle. That strength became part of them. It lived in their hearts and their bones. When danger came, humans didn't run. They fought back. So when Illyria's call for help reached them, there was no question what had to be done. Plans were drawn up overnight. The Terran Expeditionary Force, a mix of soldiers, engineers, doctors, and volunteers, began preparing for launch. They knew little about the enemy, only that they were powerful enough to destroy cities from orbit. But fear never stopped humans. They had faced extinction before. They had learned that courage meant acting, even when the outcome was uncertain. Captain Arya Holt stood at the center of it all. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and short dark hair, a soldier who had already seen too many wars. Years ago, she had lost her crew in a failed rescue mission, and the memory haunted her. But this time felt different. The moment she heard Illyria's desperate voice, something inside her lit up again. "No one cries for help and gets silence from us," she said during the briefing. "We're going." Her words spread across the fleet. Pilots, medics, engineers, they all felt it. The mission wasn't just another military operation. It was personal. It was about who humans were, about their refusal to let the innocent die alone. In the days that followed, the docks above Earth were alive with movement. Huge ships stood ready, gray giants armed for war but carrying hope. Civilians came to watch as the soldiers boarded, waving flags, cheering, and crying. Children sent letters and drawings that said things like "save them and be their heroes." For many, this was more than a rescue. It was proof that humanity still had heart in a cold galaxy. As the fleet prepared to jump through space, Arya walked through the corridors, watching her crew work. Some were veterans, calm and focused. Others were young and nervous, holding on to their weapons like they were lifelines. She stopped beside a young medic named Sergeant Reyes, who was checking medical supplies. "First time off-world?" she asked. Reyes nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I joined to help people, not to fight." Arya smiled softly. "Good. That's exactly why you belong here." When the countdown began, the engines hummed like thunder. The ships lifted from their docks, rising through the clouds. On the surface of Earth, millions watched the skies light up as the Deathworlders' fleet disappeared into the stars. Across the galaxy, the signal of their departure was picked up by other species. Some admired them. Others feared them. Because when the Deathworlders moved, it meant something terrible had happened. And something even more terrible was coming for those responsible. After days of faster-than-light travel, the fleet arrived in Illyrian space. The first thing they saw made their hearts heavy. A planet covered in smoke. The once green fields were now black scars. From orbit, cities looked like ashes scattered across a dead world. There were no defense ships, no signs of resistance, only the faint signals of survivors hiding beneath the surface. "God," whispered one of the pilots. "They really burned everything." Captain Arya's voice came through the intercom, calm but hard. "We're not here to mourn. We're here to fight. Start scanning for survivors in enemy positions." The Deathworlders began to move like a storm. Dropships broke through the atmosphere, landing in burning cities and ruined forests. The ground shook as the soldiers stepped out, black armor reflecting the flames, weapons ready. They found what was left of Illyria's people, thin, frightened, and half-starved. Many couldn't believe their eyes when they saw the humans. To the Illyrians, they looked almost monstrous, their armor thick, their eyes fierce, their movements sharp. But when the first human reached out a hand helping an old Illyrian stand, the fear faded. "You're safe now," the soldier said softly. "We're here to help." For the survivors, it felt like a miracle. They had cried into the void, and someone had answered. The humans didn't ask for payment, didn't ask for surrender. They simply came because someone needed them. Meanwhile, the alien invaders, the Vrax Dominion, were not prepared for resistance. They had expected a quiet victory. When they detected human ships in orbit, panic spread through their ranks. Reports filled their channels. Unknown fleet approaching. Human signatures detected. The name Deathworlders carried weight even among the Vrax. They had fought humans before and learned to fear their rage. Humans didn't just fight wars, they survived them. Arya's strategy was quick and brutal. Instead of large battles, she sent small units to strike the enemy from unexpected directions. They used the terrain, mountains, ruins, forests, to ambush and destroy Vrax patrols. The humans moved, like ghosts appearing from nowhere, hitting hard and vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. It was a kind of war the Vrax were not built for. In one of the first missions, Reyes and his medical team landed near a destroyed settlement. They expected no survivors, but in the middle of the rubble, they found a small Illyrian girl hiding under a metal beam. Her skin was pale, her eyes wide with terror. When Reyes lifted the beam, she screamed, thinking he was one of the invaders, but he took off his helmet and smiled. "It's okay," he said gently. "You're safe now." She stared at him, confused by his kindness. Then she slowly reached out her hand. That tiny gesture became something much larger, a symbol of trust between two worlds. News spread among the survivors that the Deathworlders had arrived. People came out of hiding, following the sound of human dropships. They watched in silence as the humans built camps, shared food, and treated the wounded. One Illyrian elder said with tears in his eyes, "They came for us. The legends were true." But even as hope grew, Arya knew the battle was far from over. The Vraks were regrouping, preparing to strike again. Reports came in of enemy warships approaching from the far side of the planet. The humans had saved thousands, but the fight for Illyria's freedom had only just begun. That night, Arya stood on a cliff overlooking the burning valleys. The wind carried the smell of smoke and ash. Behind her, soldiers rested beside their vehicles, exhausted but alive. She looked up at the stars and whispered, "We heard your cry, Illyria, and we will answer it, no matter the cost." In the darkness, the stars seemed to shine brighter as if listening. Somewhere among them the enemy gathered strength, but they didn't understand yet what kind of warriors had come. The Deathworlders weren't just soldiers, they were survivors, protectors, and the kind of heroes that history would remember forever. And as the fires of war spread across Illyria, one truth echoed in every heart, both human and Illyrian. The call for help had been answered, and the Deathworlders would not leave until the light of hope returned to that broken world. The morning sky over Illyria was gray and filled with smoke. The air smelled of burning metal and dust. The sound of explosions echoed far away like thunder rolling across the land. The war had truly begun. The Deathworlders, the humans who had come from Earth, were no longer strangers. They had become the only shield standing between the Illyrians and total destruction. Captain Arya Holt stood on the roof of a broken building, her armor covered in ash. Through her visor, she watched the horizon where enemy ships moved like black shadows. Her troops were scattered across the ruins, helping survivors and fighting back. "We're holding for now," said her second-in-command through the radio. "But the Vraks are sending reinforcements." Arya's voice stayed calm. "Then we'll send them home in pieces." Down in the streets, human soldiers worked side by side with Illyrians. The humans were stronger, faster, used to pain and danger, but the Illyrians had heart. They knew the land, the tunnels, the hidden paths, the old mining shafts that twisted under the city. Together they began to fight back. The Deathworlders taught the Illyrians how to build traps, how to move quietly, how to use fire and light to confuse enemy drones. It was no longer just a rescue. It was a rebellion. The Vraks' dominion had never faced anything like this. Their soldiers were tall, armored, and cold. They had conquered many worlds easily, crushing weak resistance in days. But on Illyria they met something different. The humans didn't fight with fear. They fought with fury. Every battle was a storm. Every street turned into a trap. The Vraks couldn't understand how creatures from a single small planet could fight like demons and still protect others at the same time. In one battle near the old city square, a group of Vrak soldiers marched through the ruins, scanning for survivors. They moved in silence, weapons glowing blue. Suddenly, a small explosion went off under their feet. Rocks and dust filled the air. Before they could react, human soldiers appeared from the smoke. They were fast, moving low and close. They fired short bursts, hitting targets one after another. The Vraks tried to counterattack, but the humans didn't give them time. They fought with the kind of precision that came from instinct and experience, the kind only Deathworlders had. When the fight ended, silence returned. Sergeant Reyes, the medic who had saved the little Illyrian girl, came running from behind the barricades. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was carrying supplies. There were wounded soldiers, both human and Illyrian, lying on the ground. Reyes worked fast, stopping bleeding, giving painkillers, wrapping bandages. "You'll be fine," he said to one of the Illyrians, whose arm was badly burned. The Illyrian looked at him with tears in his eyes. "You fight like the gods," he whispered. Reyes shook his head. "No, we fight because we can't let you die." Moments like that began to spread across the planet. Illyrians started to believe again. They told stories about the humans, about how they walked through fire, how they carried the wounded on their backs, how they smiled even in battle. They called them the Iron Souls, but the war was far from over. The Vraks' dominion changed their tactics. They began using orbital bombardments, firing from their ships in space to destroy whole sections of the planet. They dropped burning metals and poisonous gas, making the air deadly. For many, it seemed like the end again. The Deathworlders had powerful weapons, but they couldn't fight the sky. Captain Arya gathered her officers around a holographic map. The faces of her soldiers were tired and dirty. "They're trying to smoke us out," said one of them. "If they keep this up, there won't be anything left to save." Arya stared at the map for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "Then we'll take the fight to them." The next few days were chaos. The humans launched attacks at night, striking enemy supply lines and command centers. They used small squads instead of big armies, hitting fast and vanishing before the Vraks could respond. It was dangerous, but it worked. The enemy started losing control. For the first time since the invasion began, the Vraks were on the defensive. In one of these missions, Captain Arya led a small team into a destroyed industrial zone. Their goal was to rescue a group of Illyrians trapped in a building surrounded by drones. The night was cold and silent, except for the buzzing of machines. "Stay low," Arya whispered. The team moved through shadows, stepping over broken glass and burned walls. When they reached the building, they could hear crying from inside. Then the drones saw them. Red lights flared in the dark, and a storm of energy fire filled the air. Arya ducked behind a wall, returning fire. "Cover the medic!" she shouted. Reyes crawled forward, helping the trapped Illyrians escape through a side door. One drone came too close. Arya jumped forward and struck it with her knife, sparks flying as it crashed to the ground. When the last drone fell, she looked around. Everyone was safe, but the price was high. 2 soldiers had been killed. Later that night, when the survivors were safe in camp, Arya sat alone, staring into the flames of a small fire. Reyes approached quietly. "We saved them," he said softly. Arya nodded. "Yes, but every time we save someone, we lose someone else." Her voice trembled slightly. Reyes sat beside her. "That's war, ma'am. But look at them. The Illyrians are alive because of us. That's worth it." Arya said nothing, but she knew he was right. As the days passed, something incredible happened. The Illyrians stopped hiding. They started fighting beside the humans. Farmers picked up rifles, engineers built defenses, and young boys and girls carried ammunition. They were no longer just victims, they were soldiers now. The Deathworlders had given them more than protection. They had given them courage. The bond between the two species grew deeper every day. Humans shared their food, taught the Illyrians first aid, and even joked with them around campfires. Despite the fear and pain, there were moments of laughter. It reminded everyone what they were fighting for: life, friendship, and the chance to see another sunrise. But the Vraks' dominion refused to give up. When their ground forces began to fail, they unleashed something worse: a biological weapon. Dark clouds drifted across the cities, and anyone who breathed the air started coughing blood. Panic spread like wildfire. The humans quickly built shelters and handed out masks. Their scientists worked day and night to find a cure. Many of them fell ill themselves but refused to stop. Reyes was one of those who got sick. Even as his body weakened, he kept helping others. The little Illyrian girl he had saved, Mira, stayed by his side, bringing him water and food. "You'll be okay," she told him. "You're a Deathworlder." Reyes smiled weakly. "That means we don't die easy." Finally, after days of work, the humans found a way to neutralize the weapon. They released counter-agents into the air, cleaning the poison slowly. When the skies finally cleared, the Illyrians stood outside and looked up. For the first time in months, they saw the stars again. People cried, hugged, and whispered prayers. The war was still raging, but now the world had changed. The Deathworlders were not just rescuers anymore. They had become part of Illyria. Every battle they fought was now for a shared home. Captain Arya watched the sunrise from the ridge overlooking the ruined city. The light touched the broken buildings, making them glow softly. She could hear laughter in the distance, children playing again. It was a small sound, but it meant everything. She took off her helmet, feeling the wind on her face. "This is what we fight for," she murmured. Then a message came through her communicator. "Captain, enemy fleet incoming." "They're regrouping for a full-scale assault." Arya's eyes hardened. The rest would have to wait. The fight was far from over, but she felt no fear. She knew now that they could win, not because they were stronger, but because they were united. As the Deathworlders prepared for the next battle, one truth echoed in every heart, human and Illyrian alike. Heroes were not born in peace. They were forged in fire, and on the ashes of Illyria the fire of hope was burning brighter than ever. The days after the poison clouds cleared were strangely quiet. The wind moved through the broken cities carrying the smell of smoke and dust. But that silence was not peace, it was the calm before the storm. Everyone on Illyria knew it. The Varax Dominion had suffered heavy losses, but they were not done. They were gathering their strongest army for one last strike. If they succeeded, everything the Deathworlders and Illyrians had fought for would burn to nothing. Captain Arya Holt stood inside a ruined control tower, looking over the map spread on a cracked table. Her armor was scratched, her face tired, but her eyes were still sharp. Around her, soldiers and Illyrian fighters waited for her words. The final battle would happen at Valen Ridge, a long mountain range near the capital, where the last surviving population shelters were hidden. If the Vrax captured it, thousands of civilians would die. Arya pointed at the map. They're coming from the east, she said. Their main force will hit here with heavy air support. We'll use the old tunnels to flank them. If we can destroy their command center, we break their control. An Illyrian man named Darren, once a miner, now a leader, spoke up. We'll fight with you, he said. Our people know those tunnels better than anyone. Arya looked at him and nodded. Then we fight together. We end this here. That night, preparations began. Soldiers checked their weapons, medics packed supplies, engineers built barricades. In the dark corners of the camp, Illyrian mothers hugged their children tightly, whispering prayers. Some of the children cried, afraid their parents would never return. Others stayed silent, their faces set with determination. Everyone knew this battle would decide everything. Sergeant Reyes, still weak from his illness but refusing to rest, was cleaning his rifle when little Mira approached him. She looked up at him with big, worried eyes. Are you going to fight again? She asked. Reyes smiled gently. Yes, but this time we're fighting so you never have to again. Mira frowned. Promise you'll come back? Reyes paused, then placed a small pendant around her neck, a simple metal tag with his name. If I don't, you keep this. It means I kept my promise. At dawn, the sky over Valen Ridge filled with dark shapes. The Vrax fleet had arrived. Their warships blocked out the sun, casting shadows over the land. The first explosions hit the mountains, shaking the earth. The ground troops, both human and Illyrian, braced for impact. Here they come, someone shouted. The battle began with fire and chaos. The Vrax advanced with heavy armor, their plasma weapons cutting through rock and metal. The Deathworlders met them head-on. The ground shook with every explosion. Human soldiers used their powerful rifles to target enemy machines, while Illyrian fighters struck from the tunnels, attacking from behind. The air was filled with smoke, screams, and the constant roar of engines. Captain Arya led from the front. She moved fast, shouting orders, firing her weapon with deadly precision. She refused to hide behind command screens. They need to see us fighting, she told her officers earlier. They need to know we're here with them. Her presence kept the soldiers' spirits alive. Even when the enemy pushed hard, no one backed down. Hours passed and the battle showed no sign of slowing. The humans and Illyrians fought like one body. Every fall covered, every wound avenged. The Vrax began to realize this was not just another conquest. They were facing something they didn't understand. Unity born from pain and courage. As the day turned into night, both sides were exhausted, but the fighting continued under the burning sky. Then a new wave of enemy ships descended, bombarding everything below. Buildings exploded, mountains cracked, and the defenders were thrown to the ground. For a moment, it seemed over. In the chaos, Reyes was helping the wounded when an explosion threw him to the ground. His ears rang, and when he opened his eyes, he saw fire all around. He crawled through the debris to reach a fallen Illyrian boy trapped under metal. With trembling hands, he pulled the child free. It's okay, he said, coughing. You're safe. The boy looked at him and whispered, Why do you help us? You don't even know us. Reyes smiled weakly. Because no one should die alone. Meanwhile, Arya's unit had reached the front line near the Vrax command outpost, a fortress built into the side of a mountain. It was heavily guarded. She knew destroying it was the only way to stop the attack. We go now, she said into the radio. All units focus fire on the ridge. We're going in. Her team advanced through falling debris, dodging enemy fire. The sound was deafening, every step a fight against death itself. One by one her soldiers fell, but they didn't stop. When they finally reached the entrance of the enemy command post, there were only a few of them left. Inside, the alien officer shouted orders. unaware that the humans were already among them. Arya led the charge, bursting through the door and firing. The fight inside was brutal and fast. Arya's team cleared room after room until they reached the control chamber. There she saw the Vrax commander, tall, armored, and furious. "You're too late," he hissed in his strange, deep voice. "This world will burn with you." Arya's eyes blazed. Not today. She fired and the commander fell, but she knew it wasn't enough. Outside, the enemy warship in orbit was preparing to unleash a final strike that would destroy everything below, both sides alike. The only way to stop it was from within the control station's reactor core. Arya looked at the glowing console and realized what had to be done. She called her ship through the comm. "Command, this is Holt. Prepare evacuation of ground units. I'm initiating overload sequence." Her second-in-command's voice came through, panicked. "Captain, you won't make it out in time." Arya took a deep breath. "It doesn't matter. Make sure they live." She entered the code manually, her hands steady even as alarms blared around her. The countdown began. Outside, the sky turned brighter as the reactor overloaded. The humans and Illyrians fighting below saw the mountain begin to glow from inside. "What's happening?" Someone shouted. Reyes looked up, tears filling his eyes. "She's doing it," he whispered. "She's ending this." The explosion came a moment later, a massive burst of light that tore through the enemy fleet in the sky. The Vrax warship above Illyria cracked apart, breaking into fire and debris. The shockwave spread across the battlefield, knocking everyone to the ground. For a few seconds there was nothing but silence and light. When the dust settled, the enemy was gone. The Vrax ships were destroyed, their ground troops scattered or dead. The people of Illyria lifted their heads slowly, realizing they were still alive. But Captain Arya's voice never came back on the radio. Her ship, her team, everything near the ridge was gone. Reyes stood among the survivors, his face dirty and wet with tears. Around him, both humans and Illyrians began to cheer weakly, their voices rising like a single cry. "We're free," someone shouted. "Illyria is free." The sun rose the next morning over a world that had been saved, but at a terrible cost. The once gray sky was clear, and for the first time in months it was peaceful. The survivors gathered at the ruins of Valen Ridge. In the distance, smoke still rose from the mountains where Arya and her team had made their stand. Reyes took Mira's hand and looked toward the light. "She kept her promise," he said quietly. Mira held the pendant around her neck and nodded. "She came when we cried for heroes." And as the wind moved through the broken land carrying the smell of ashes and hope, everyone knew that Illyria's story would never be forgotten. Captain Arya Holt and her Deathworlders had given everything, and in doing so, they had proved what it truly meant to be human, to fight not for power, but for those who needed them most. The battle for Illyria had ended. The war had taken everything from them, yet it had also given them something no enemy could destroy: unity, courage, and the memory of heroes who answered a cry from the stars. Months passed after the final battle on Illyria. The scars of war were still fresh on the land. The cities were broken, the skies still gray, and the ground carried the ashes of both the living and the dead. But even in that ruin, life had begun to move again. Slowly, people started rebuilding what had been destroyed. Children laughed in the streets again. Farmers planted new crops in burned fields, and the sound of hammers replaced the sound of gunfire. The planet was healing, not quickly but surely. Sergeant Reyes often walked through the rebuilt camp, helping wherever he could. His body was still weak, but his heart was strong. Every morning he watched the sunrise from the same ridge where the last battle had taken place. It was the place where Captain Arya Holt and her team had made their final stand. The mountain still held the marks of fire, and sometimes when the wind blew a certain way, it carried the faint smell of burnt metal, a reminder of the sacrifice that saved them all. The people of Illyria built a monument there. It was simple, a tall stone tower carved with the names of those who died in the battle. At the top, a single metal piece from Arya's destroyed armor was placed, shining under the sun. Every day, someone came to leave flowers, candles, or small tokens of gratitude. No one forgot what had been done for them. Mira, the little girl who had once cried for heroes, visited the monument often. She had grown taller, her eyes no longer filled with fear but with hope. Around her neck, she still wore Reyes's pendant, now scratched and old. She believed it protected her. One morning she stood quietly before the monument, whispering softly, "Thank you," she said, "for hearing us when we needed you." Her words disappeared in the wind, but everyone who came there felt the same gratitude. Reyes joined her a moment later. He placed a small flower at the base of the monument and said nothing for a while. Finally, he spoke softly. "She would have liked to see this world now," he said. "She believed we could rebuild." Mira looked up at him. "Do you think she's still watching us?" Reyes smiled faintly. "If there's a place where heroes go, then yes, she's watching." Life slowly began to return to something close to normal. The Illyrians worked side by side with the human engineers who stayed behind. Together they built new power stations, schools, and homes. The Deathworlders didn't leave immediately after the battle. They stayed to teach, to help, and to ensure that the mistakes of the past wouldn't repeat. What started as a rescue mission had become something more, a bond between two worlds. The humans shared their knowledge, and the Illyrians shared their ways of living in harmony with nature. It wasn't always easy. There were disagreements, small conflicts, and moments of mistrust, but they always found a way to talk, to listen, and to move forward. The war had taken so much, but it had also taught them that survival meant standing together, no matter how different they were. One evening, a small ceremony was held at the capital. The new Council of Illyria invited everyone, humans, Illyrians, and even some from neighboring colonies, to witness the official declaration of peace and unity. Reyes stood near the back, watching as the Illyrian leader, Darren, spoke to the crowd. His voice was strong and clear. "We called for help when our skies were burning," Darren said. "We thought no one would answer. But across the stars, someone heard us. They came not as conquerors, but as protectors. They fought beside us, died beside us, and gave us back our future." The Deathworlders proved that true strength is not in destruction, but in compassion. "We are alive because they cared." The crowd erupted into applause. People cheered, some wept. In that moment, the divide between species, between worlds, disappeared. They were not humans or Illyrians anymore. They were survivors united by loss and hope. After the ceremony, Reyes was approached by a young soldier. "Sir," he said shyly, "they want to name the new academy after Captain Holt. The Arya Holt Academy for Peace and Defense. It'll train both humans and Illyrians together." Reyes nodded slowly, a sad smile crossing his face. "She would have liked that," he said. "She always believed in learning, even during war." Later that night, Reyes went back to the ridge. The stars above were brighter than he had ever seen them. It was quiet, peaceful. He sat near the monument, closed his eyes, and remembered the sound of Arya's voice, her calm confidence even when everything seemed lost. "Make sure they live," she had said. He had kept that promise. He took a deep breath and whispered to the sky, "We did it, Captain. They're safe. You can rest now." A soft wind passed over him, brushing his face gently as if answering. He smiled through the tears that slipped down his cheeks. Over time, Illyria became a symbol across the galaxy. Other planets heard the story, how a dying world called for help and how the Deathworlders came, not for glory or conquest, but for compassion. The story spread among colonies, inspiring songs, books, and even new missions of cooperation. Whenever someone mentioned the Battle of Illyria, they didn't just talk about war. They talked about humanity, what it meant to stand for others. Years later, Mira grew up to become a leader herself. She worked with both Illyrians and humans to strengthen peace. People respected her wisdom and her courage even though she was still young. Sometimes, when she faced hard decisions, she would touch the pendant on her neck and remember the man who gave it to her, and the woman who gave everything. One day, during a speech at the academy named after Captain Holt, Mira told the story again. Her story. "I was a child when the war came," she said. "I cried for heroes and they came from the stars. They didn't come because they had to. They came because it was the right thing to do. That is what makes them heroes. And that is what we must become. For others, for ourselves, and for the future." The audience listened in silence. Many had tears in their eyes. When she finished, they stood and applauded, not just for her, but for everyone who had once fought for Illyria's freedom. Outside the academy, a large mural showed Captain Arya Holt standing side by side with an Illyrian child, a reminder that courage has no species and kindness has no borders. Years continued to pass. The new generation was born into peace, not war. They read about the Deathworlders in their history lessons, learned their names, and visited their monuments. To them, Arya Holt and her team were legends, but to the older ones they were still real, still remembered with love and sorrow. Sometimes the night sky above Illyria would shimmer with falling stars. The elders would tell the children, "Look, those are the Deathworlders watching over us." The children would laugh and wave at the sky, their small hands reaching for the light. And far away on a distant world, a new fleet of Deathworlders prepared for another mission. They carried with them the same insignia, a small silver emblem shaped like a rising sun, the symbol of Illyria. When one of the new captains asked about its meaning, Reyes, now older and serving as an advisor, smiled and said, "It means hope. It means when someone cries for heroes, we respond." The galaxy had changed. The Deathworlders were no longer seen as monsters from harsh worlds. They were seen as guardians, proof that even those born in darkness could bring light. Illyria stood as a living memory of that truth, a world reborn from pain into peace. And though time continued to move forward, the legend of those who answered the cry for heroes never faded. Their story was told again and again, not just as a tale of war, but as a promise that when the weak call for help, someone will always answer. In the quiet of night, under the endless stars, the wind whispered across Illyria's fields, carrying a single message that every soul on the planet could feel deep inside. They came when we cried, and they never truly left.